Hi, this is Jonathan Rosenhead, the Jerusalem psychotherapist. This week's Torah and Psychology post for Parsha Tzav is going to be a combination, obviously looking at this week's Parsha, and preparation for Pesach, by discussing the idea of Korbanos. Because in this week's Parsha, we continue to read about the Mishkan and the duties of the Kohanim and performing the bringing of Korbanos in the Mishkan. And also on Pesach, we obviously have the significance of the Korban Pesach. So if we look at the idea of Korbanos, and we try to understand it from a psychological perspective, ostensibly we could perhaps view it or receive this sort of negative understanding of Korbanos. Because if we take the example of a Korban Chatos, when someone has committed a chet, a sin, has made a mistake, they will bring a Korban Chatos. So one way of understanding this is that it could be that instead of the person taking ownership over their error, the mistake that they made, the sin, and they understand that they themselves made a mistake, they project this sin, they project this uncomfortable feeling, this feelings of guilt perhaps, or feeling of tension and anxiety, they project it onto the animal, and the animal is offered instead of them. So this is perhaps showing the usage of a korban as a defense mechanism of projection. And also in Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, in the psychological terms, if we look at korban or korbanot, this is a word or term used whether it's for a victim or victimization, whether it's in family domestic violence perhaps, or in the social realm of a person being victimized. It's a term that's used in Hebrew for the idea of a victim or victimization. So this all seems to paint a negative picture of korbanos, of korbanot, of a victim, of projection, a psychological defense mechanism. But this is obviously not the accurate way of viewing korbanos, and in fact we want to try to understand it from a psychological perspective as it being a therapeutic opportunity of being able to process and being able to look at the situation that person's in, and perhaps they are struggling, and they're able to process and come out of this in an adaptive way through using a korban. So, if we look at it in this week's Parsha and for Korban Pesach, bringing a korban was actually an opportunity to celebrate in a way, celebrate the opportunity, and to in a way appreciate the opportunity that Hashem has given to a person to acknowledge, understand, process that people make mistakes. A korban chatos, if a person has performed a sin, it doesn't mean that the person is condemned and now there is no way of getting out of the situation, that they have basically cut themselves off from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. What Hashem is saying is there's an opportunity to take ownership, to look at the mistakes that you make, and to be able to return and come to the home, come to Kadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem is there to meet the person, to accept a person's mistakes, and to join them and say, this is your opportunity to look at the mistakes that you make and move on. And coming to the Mishkan, or coming to the Beis Mikdash and bringing a korban was a special occasion. It was in a way, it was a mini individual chag, a festival for the person. Coming to the Mishkan and the Beis Mikdash to bring a korban was a joyous, was a significant, was a special occasion. And this is what change is actually all about. The opportunity for change, although it's difficult, although it can be painful, although it can be very uncomfortable for a person to look at the mistakes that they have made, having the opportunity to make a change, to in a way correct and try to change their life in an adaptive way is something to celebrate, it's something to appreciate, and it's something to cherish. But it doesn't have to be that this is a process done alone. Looking at one's mistakes, looking at the errors that a person has made, and maybe the defaults the person has, can be very difficult and very challenging and very uncomfortable. What can be helpful is if you do this with the support of other people. And this is the significance of Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach was a unique carbon that actually afforded people the opportunity to bring the carbon as a chabura, a group of people together, a family. People that couldn't bring by themselves were able to join with other people to bring the carbon Pesach. This is a unique lesson that shows that bringing a carbon, having a connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, bringing about change in one's life can be done together. Either because you see that other people are also suffering like you and are joining in this chabura, joining in this group to bring the Korban Pesach, because you are in a way collectively are suffering and can join together, or perhaps just simply because of empathy, that other people can join you in your suffering, can join together because they are able to try to connect and understand and join the chabura from a place of empathy. So we see an important message from Korbanos, not as a defense mechanism of projection, of victimization, of being a victim, but rather taking ownership and responsibility and control over your situation, to try to look for a way to bring about change and to go through this process, not in isolation and in a lonely, uncomfortable place, but to join together to try to actually relish the opportunity to bring about change in your life, and that there are people that can join you and help you, and there can be a chabura of people to go through this change process. And this is the message from this week's Parsha, and also an important message to take into for Pesach. So I wish you a good Shabbos and Chag Pesach Kasher v'Sameach.